In this video, we're going to walk through the Microsoft Lab, create Azure users and groups in Azure Active Directory. Now, for some of you, this may be your first experience working with Azure Active Directory, and it has a lot of great features. We start off with an introduction talking about how maybe you're working for a marketing organization and you need to set up a new environment in Azure for your development team. Let's see, it starts talking about what are user accounts in Azure Active Directory. They're very similar to standard Active Directory user accounts, except for the fact that they're up in the cloud. Now, these cloud accounts can synchronize with your physical accounts. However, sometimes you want them to be separate. Sometimes you may only want cloud accounts as opposed to local Azure Active Directory accounts. But you can set permissions and roles, such as administrator and members. And then you can also set up groups. Now, we can do this through PowerShell or through the Azure CLI, and you can see an example right here. If we read this backwards, we create an AD user in Azure, and then specify the username along with that, as well as with a PowerShell option of a new Azure AD user. Now, once it's in Azure AD, we can manage it exactly the same way we would with traditional Active Directory as far as granting access to groups and granting permissions to those groups. The lab then gives us an example of using bulk creation of members. For instance, maybe we have a file here called invitations.csv, and we can import that into PowerShell. We can then create a new message for those users, such as saying, hello, you're invited here, and then send emails to all of those users. Additionally, we can also delete users, such as remove Azure AD user or Azure AD user delete. So delete AD user in Azure. When you delete an AD user, it doesn't actually delete the user. It actually puts it into a suspended state for 30 days, so you can quickly and easily undelete it. Let's go ahead and look into our exercises here. So I've already fired up a sandbox, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create an Azure AD organization. So for that, I'll open up a new window into the portal, and I'll move the instructions to another screen. What we're going to do is we're going to create a resource, and we don't see, I don't see Azure AD under the popular items. So what I want to specify a new Azure Active Directory environment. That's going to be under identity. Azure Active Directory helps maintain identity for our users. So I'll specify identity. And then on the right-hand side, Azure AD domain services. I think that's right. It's a slightly different name than what is in the lab. Let's try that again. Let's actually just search for Active Directory and see what it gives us. There we go. That looks more correct of what I want. So we'll choose that and create. Now, the instructions do give us an organization name. We can change this if we want, but I will go ahead and stay with what's in the instructions. So Contoso Marketing Company. And then the initial domain name will be Contoso Marketing. And it needs to be globally unique. As you can see, somebody already has Contoso Marketing, so I will type in my initials in order to make it completely unique. Country, United States. Go ahead and say create, and it says, yes, that may take a minute or two for it to complete. When it's created, we'll go ahead and just be able to click to join right into it. One thing to note is when we join into it, up here on the upper right hand corner, it says currently egoed at greenriver.edu with my Microsoft Learn Sandbox. that will actually change as we go into the new directory. All right, so it says the tenant was created successfully, and now it says click here to manage your new tenant. So I will go ahead and click on that, and we'll see that it logs me into a new Azure portal. And the tenant name up here in the right hand corner now says Contoso Marketing Company. So we've changed from one subscription to another, or from one tenant to another. Now, one of the things I want to do is I want to have more than just some basic Active Directory capabilities. I want to increase my abilities with regards to Azure. Basically, I want to increase to Azure AD Premium. And so in here, I need to click Getting Started. And then under Getting Started, I'm going to scroll down and I'm looking for get free trial for Azure AD Premium. And on the list here, I want to say Azure AD Premium P2. All right, so now it's creating a new, or it's allowing me to do the Azure AD Premium version 2, which then allows me to have a whole lot more security and other features built into it. So with that being said, let's go ahead and let's create some users. So on the left-hand side here, I'm going to scroll on down and I see right there is users. And actually, before I do that, let's look at our roles. So roles and administrators. And we can see first off, my role is global administrator. If I was in a traditional Active Directory environment, this would be the equivalent of a domain admin or an enterprise admin. If for instance, it does not say that, and possibly it doesn't say Contoso Marketing up here, I can actually click on this and say switch directory, and we'll see the various directories that I can move into. But okay, so I am the global administrator. Let's go ahead and create some users. So I want to go ahead and click new user. Here I have an option. I can either create a new user or I can invite a new user. I'm going to go ahead and say create. For the username, let's go ahead and call him Chris Green. So Chris, his login will be chris@contosomarketing.onmicrosoft.com. For the time being, we can eventually change the domain name to something more specific for our environment. So this is Chris Green, first name Chris Green. And by default, it will auto-generate a passcode, and I can actually click show it. That will generate automatically every time a new user is created. I can then copy that and send it to Chris. Go and say OK. And no, don't remember that password. And there we can see there is Chris Green. So creating users, pretty easy. Now we can also delete these users. So now while I'm looking at the users, I can just go ahead and click the little checkbox and I can click delete. Delete the selected users? Yes. I may not have wanted to do that. I may actually want to recover that. So I'm actually going to click under, on the left-hand side here, under deleted users. And there I can see Chris. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight him. And then up at the top, I'll select restore. So that removes or moves my accidentally deleted user back into my, should move him back into my all users view here. Restore. There we go. Removes him back into my traditional users group. So that is creating users. Let's go ahead and look at creating some groups. Let's see. So I'm going to click back to my domain environment. And we were just looking at the users under manage. I'm going to click now groups. Under groups, I'll go ahead and click new group. Group type of security or Office 365. Office 365 allows me to create essentially distribution lists. What should I call this? Well, let's call this the developer group. And then group description. Well, this is the developer team. The group description is optional, whereas the group type and group name are required. Go ahead and say OK. And once that's done, we can go ahead and we can look into the group. So I'll click on the group itself right here. On the left-hand side here, we can see members. I'll click on that and then say add members. So which users do we want to add? Well, let's go ahead and add Chris in there. So we can either scroll here and we'll see that there are lots of identities already created here. So I could select Chris, or I could just simply type in Chris in the search field, which then highlights them. Click him and then say select. And there, Chris is now a member of the group. Now that was for traditional security groups. What we can do is we can also add some dynamic assignments. So if I go into properties for the security group here, I can change the membership type. Membership type is currently assigned. Should be able to change that. All right, so I refreshed the screen and my membership type became available to me. It currently says membership type is assigned, which means I manually assign users to it. We can actually change this to dynamic. So a dynamic user or a dynamic device, all depending on whether these are user groups or devices. And what I can do once I've selected dynamic is I can add in a dynamic query. Now, the great thing about dynamic queries is we can have people add or remove from these groups automatically, all depending on their configuration. So for instance, I may want to go ahead and add an expression. Oh, I guess there was already one there. What we can do is let's go ahead and choose a property. In this case, we'll choose a country. So maybe we want everybody in a specific country to be a member of a group. So country equals, and in this case, United States. At that point, we then have our rule syntax. Whoa. So then if a user is in the country, United States, they will automatically be added into the security group. Now we can change these to many other properties, such as whether the account is enabled, what city they're in, what company they're with, what department they're in, what their job title is, and so on. And then we can also add and or configuration. So the user has to be in the United States and a member of or in a specific city, or United States or Canada. So we'll go ahead and say save, and save, yes. At this point, we can't manually add users into this groups. So if we go back into members, we'll see that the add members button is gone. But now anytime a user is created and their properties are defined as being a member of, in the United States, they will automatically be created in here. If that's not what you want, well, go back to properties, go and change the membership type back to assigned, and then save. So that was with traditional user accounts. One of the great things about Azure Active Directory is we can do what's called guest users in our environment. So if we go back to our domain environment, there we go, Azure Active Directory for our company. What we can do is we can add in new users, but maybe we have a user coming in who's not a member of our business. Maybe it's a vendor who's coming in for a couple of weeks and doing some work for us. Traditional Active Directory, well, you would have to create a new user for that user. They would then have a new username and a new password specifically for your organization that you would have to maintain and that they would have to remember. And then if they come back, you have to either reset their password or they have to remember it in order to keep working. With Azure Active Directory, we can use a new guest user for a user that may already have an Active Directory account somewhere else. So in this case, it starts off and it goes into the invite user. And so we can go ahead and we can specify a new user. Let's go ahead and call him Joe Smith. And we'll say that his email is joesmith@example.com. And then we can attach a message. Please join to do some work for us. Specify what groups or roles they should have, and then go ahead and invite. Now what that does is that actually sends them an email address that invites them into your organization in order to do some work for you. Assuming that account, that email that I just sent to, already has a Microsoft Azure or a Microsoft account of some sort, they will then be able to log into Azure Active Directory with the permissions I've given them, or into my Azure environment with the permissions I've given them, without requiring a separate user account specifically for our environment. While we're here, let's go ahead and look at some business applications. So let's go back to our Azure Active Directory here. And what we want to do is we want to look at extending our environment to some web-based applications. So let's see, let's go ahead and scroll on down. We're looking for enterprise applications right here under Manage. And the enterprise applications, you can see there's a couple of them already set up there, such as Office 365, Skype, and so on. And we can add additional applications. Let's go ahead and say New. And in this case, we're going to be looking for Twitter. Is it on the featured list? No. If it's not on the list, let's go ahead and search for it. Let's say that my company has a full-blown Twitter feed and I want somebody to be able to manage that. So I can go ahead and say, yes, I want Twitter as a business application, and then I can assign permissions to it via Active Directory. Now, we're not going to go through the actual configuration of our Twitter feed with regards to how to log into Twitter and have it configured. That is the setup single sign-on process right here. But what we are going to do is we are going to add permissions to a specific user. So assign users and groups. Go ahead and assign some users. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and assign a user. Let's go ahead and assign Chris here access to Twitter. So assign, and now in theory, Chris has admin rights to access our Twitter feed, assuming we finished the setup of the Twitter feed. This is really great because now when Chris goes to log in, he can actually log in and start seeing a Twitter application that is assigned to him through Active Directory and allows him to manage our Twitter feed automatically. The other great benefit here is that if Chris ever leaves, well, we can go ahead and just disable his account, which will automatically disable Chris's access to Twitter. If Chris's password needs to be changed, we change it in one place, and it changes his access password to Twitter as well. Now, that was just for one specific application. You can definitely see in here that there are thousands of different applications. I mean, there's a few suggested ones there, but there are thousands that you can get to by simply clicking through search. If those don't fit in there, don't fit into your existing environment, you can then create your own additional applications as needed.